Hey there everyone, how's it going? Welcome to Code Engage. This is the third and the final video in this series of JSON with Python. In the previous two videos, we had discussed about what JSON actually is, how we can work with JSON data natively in our Python code, and also we took a look as to how we can work with JSON files, extract certain information from it, and also modify certain data in that piece of JSON data which we had, and again stored it back to another file which essentially existed in our local system. So in this particular video, as promised to you earlier, we'll take a look as to how we can make a call to a real world server which exists on the internet, which is essentially known as an API, and how we can fetch data from it and convert it to equivalent Python objects, work with it, for example extract certain information out of it, and all of those stuffs like that's related to JSON and Python we'll cover in this video. If you haven't watched the previous two videos, no worries, I'll put a link to those in the description section below. You can first of all go through those videos if you are very much new with JSON and Python, such that you get to like know about the basics and all stuff, and then you can follow along with this video. So without any further ado, let's get started. Also, if you're new to the channel, do not forget to smash the subscribe button so that you do not miss out any kind of videos when I upload them. And if you do like this video, press a thumbs up and share it with your friends and peers and whomever you might find this content is valuable. So yeah, let's get started. This is a code editor, VS Code. For this particular like demonstration, I'll create a new file known as api.py. As you can see, it exists in that same folder of which I had written the previous codes. Okay, now the API which I am gonna use, I have it here. Okay, I'll just copy this, Control C, and this is actually the URL. Okay, the like web API to which I'll make a request or a call, and whatever the data that this particular URL will provide, I'll like get it within my particular Python code and I can work with it. Okay, so this is essentially the JSON formatted data of a user known as Matthew, who most probably had registered himself or herself on like teamtreehouse.com. So that doesn't matter. You can like, if you wish, you can replace this particular URL with any other kind of a URL which essentially provides you back with a valid JSON data. All right, so that won't matter. So in my case, I'll use this. If you want to follow along, you can like note down this particular URL and you can follow along as well. So for making the request, I'll use the Python request library, and also we need to use the JSON for that passing of JSON data into Python and vice versa stuff. So if you do not have the request library installed in Python, what you can do is that navigate to your project folder. Okay, I'll just clear out the screen first. So this is the Python code, which is the like folder wherein I have my api.py file. And if you haven't installed, then just type out this pip install requests. Okay, in my case it will show you that the requirement is already satisfied, but in your case, if you haven't yet installed, it will install this particular library and then you're good to go. So the first thing which this request library provides is the get method, and herein we pass in the URL. Okay, herein we pass in the URL. This is the API or the server which is there on the internet, and what this get method of this request library does is that it makes a call to this particular API, and the data which that API provides, I'll store it in a variable. Let's call it response. Okay, so this is the stuff that's happening. As I told you, you can like replace this with anything you want, which essentially will give you back certain valid JSON data. Okay, and so in case of web APIs, if you know about it, that if your this particular call or request was successful, which means that you have successfully fetched or received the data from this web API. Okay, there is a term known as a response code or a status code. So a status code of 200 signifies that this particular call or request to that particular API which we have given here is successful and we have received the data. So just to indicate whether this thing works properly or the call was made successfully, there is an attribute of this particular response object known as status code. So it will print out the status code. Okay, and if the call was successful, the status code will be 200. So let's see whether this thing works or not. This is the particular terminal. Yeah, so as you can see, the response code got printed to be 200, which means that whatever the call which was made to this API, it was successful and the data was received back. So that's why the status code, okay, is 200 in this particular case. And so now this particular response object, okay, it also has some more properties which will give us access to the data which we had received. Okay, because once we made the call, this API servers provided like us back with something. So how we can access that? So there is one more attribute which is known as text. Okay, so whatever the data which was received from this API server, it will display it in a text format, which is essentially string in Python. So if I clear out the terminal, I guess if I run from here, it will be more clearer, like a clearer view you can get. So as you can see that this is the entire like text like data which we receive from that particular server. It's very much difficult to read, of course, because it's not yet indented. It's just a plain string which got printed on the terminal. But if you just take a look at this particular thing, this curly braces, which in turn will signify, if you have followed along with the previous videos, that whatever the thing that is printed on the terminal, it is a kind of a valid JSON data. Okay, if you take a look at this closing curly brace here, also if you take a look at this, let's say for an example, this thing, so this is a key and its value is this one. So you get a feel that this is a particular JSON data which we have received from the server, and as of now it's being printed in text format, which means strings in Python. So if you clearly remember as to what we did earlier, that if we have a string, okay, which the contents of which is a valid JSON data, we can convert that to an equivalent Python object using the json.loads method which we had. Okay, so let me comment out this particular line. For commenting in Python, we use hashtag symbol. Okay, now let me name a variable known as response data, and here what I'll do is that I'll use the loads method and I'll pass in this particular string, because I know that response.text is a string which holds a valid JSON data. Okay, it's clear from these two or three indications which I got when this thing was printed on the terminal. Okay, and if I pass it to this particular function loads, what it will do is that since the content of response.txt, the content of the string is a valid JSON data, loads will convert it to a equivalent Python object, and that will get stored inside this response data variable. So if you clearly remember in the first video what I had talked about, that if the ending is a closing curly brace, so similarly there will be an opening curly brace at the starting. So in case of JSON, it is known as a JSON object, and when it gets converted to a equivalent Python object, so this thing will essentially be referred to as a Python dictionary. Okay, so if we just for an instance, for verification purposes, if we print out the type of response data, so this should essentially give us a dictionary. Okay, so with that, let's see whether this thing works or not. Yeah, so you can see class dict stands for dictionary, so the type of response data is a Python dictionary. Yeah, So now what we can do is that since we have got this equivalent Python, let's say this Python object, okay, we can again convert it back to an equivalent JSON object such that we can view it clearly in the terminal. Okay, it provides a clearer view as to what the data we have actually received, right? Because this is in clear text format, it's very much hodgepodge. We aren't able to understand what actually this thing, the data which we had received, what is it portraying, correct? So this is an equivalent Python object, and for converting a Python object back to a JSON object, we have the dump s method. Okay, so let me name it this response JSON data. You can name it anything, I guess this makes sense. And we have this dump s method wherein we'll pass the equivalent Python object, and to make it clearer for us to read, will there is a particular argument known as indent. So I'll make indent to be 3 for instance, I guess it would be better, yeah. And now if we print out the response data, JSON data, okay, which is the equivalent JSON data which we have just converted using this dump s method, we'll get to see this particular data in a more clearer format. Okay, so let's run it from the terminal itself. Let's run it from here itself. I'll just clear out the terminal first. Okay, Python api.py. Yeah, so now see, it's more readable as to what we have got. Okay, so let me scroll up to the top. It's a lot of stuff. So, oh man, it's a big JSON data which we have received from that API. Yeah, so at the root level, as you can see, this is a JSON object, and this is the key and its corresponding value. So these are like key value pairs, as you can see these things. So as far as I can decipher looking at this particular data, that it's a data of a person named Matthew Koslowski. And if we just take a look at this, whatever the badges he has earned, okay, so maybe he took part into some kind of a program or so, or maybe a contest. So this is the badge ID and the name. So for instance, this is one particular badge that's new by, one more that is website basics, one more is creating a spoiler revealer. So this is a like next like creating a simple light box. So these are all the badges which this user may have earned. And so this is like in gist as to what this data is talking about. And now if we just want that, okay, if we want to count, okay, since you can see that badges, okay, the value of badges is a list. So if we want to know that this particular guy named Matthew, how much, like how many badges he has earned, okay, so if we start to count each item which is separated by comma here in this particular list, so it will be a havoc, right? It's so much. So what we can do is that we can make the use of Python programming logic here, and we can count the length of this particular list, which will eventually give us the length or the number of badges which this particular user has earned. So let's do that quickly, right? So let's come back here. I'll comment out this, as I do not need to print, which it is already printed once. Just a second, guys. I guess my cursor is not working. Yeah, cool. So this response JSON data is not it's a JSON data, okay, and its equivalent Python data is in this particular variable response data, right? So what we can do is that if we take a closer look, we can just access this particular value with the concept of dictionary in Python. So what I can do is that if I want to print out the name of the person whose data I have received, what I can do is that I'll do response data. It's a dictionary and it has a key named as name, okay, and Now if I want badges earned, more specifically if I want to type out number of badges earned, what I can do is that I know that response data of badges, okay, response data of badges will give me this particular list. Response data is this root level dictionary, okay, this one. So response data of badges will give me this list, and there is a function known as len, okay, in Python, which actually gives out the length of the list, okay. So the number of badges will be the length of this particular list. So here the first thing that it will do is that it will print out the name, and next the number of badges. So we want to count, right, how many badges this particular person has earned. So let's save our code and let's run it. Let's see it's like it works or not. Yeah, so as you can see, the number of batches earned was 101. So for verification, I guess it will be a much tedious task for you if you just keep on counting it manually. But yeah, since we know Python programming logic and like whatever the native constructs which Python gives, we can use it to like extract certain information which we want to know from the data which we have received from the API server. And you might also ask me how this thing can be valuable. Okay, so if you have a particular URL or an API which provides details of like not one person, here it's only about Matthew. As you can see from the URL itself, it's also clear. So let's say if you have 1,000 individuals and that particular API server is providing you the details of those 1,000 individuals, what you can do is that you can count the like the name and the corresponding badges which they have earned, okay. And depending upon the number of badges, you might want to give out certain prizes, for example some cash prize which you may have thought about. So this is a particular scenario wherein working with JSON data which you have received from the API server becomes crucial. So if you know about how you can convert that data into native programming like constructs or objects, here in case Python object, which is a dictionary, then you can use the programming constructs and then build out your own logic as to how you want to work with it. So that's it for this particular video. I hope you got to understand how we can work with real world APIs also, and how we can work with the JSON data which we receive from them. Okay, here we just extracted information, and if you have followed along with the previous videos, you even know you can modify certain stuff of this particular data, okay, and again store it back maybe to a particular file. You can use file handling for that, maybe to another new string, and you want to print it on the terminal again, you can even do that. So all of the options are open to you if you know Python very well. So I in the upcoming videos, I'll be starting with a Python playlist, a beginner playlist maybe, because most of you might be not comfortable with Python and you may want to learn Python. I'll definitely make my videos right from the very much scratch so that everyone understands, and there will be no issues as to you will actually enjoy learning Python. You'll fall in love with Python. Okay, so that's it. Take care and bye bye.